Every Englishman treasured his birthright of liberty under the common law, which forbade slavery. The original Virginia Charter documents also guaranteed liberty. Yet the English colonies developed a form of total chattel slavery, described as degraded as any in Western civilization. How did this incredible aberration occur in view of the great Anglo-American tradition of freedom? Englishmen treasured their birthright of freedom, and for 100 years, they looked with scorn on the Spanish New World venture to which slavery was so integral. Yet the Negroes brought to America, after a brief equivocal period during which their fate teetered between freedom and slavery, would fall into a form of total chattel slavery, peculiar to the North American continent, and described by Professor Herbert S. Klein as degraded as any in Western civilization. In the case of Virginia, the fate of the Negro was sealed as total chattel slavery by 1662, 43 years after the arrival of the first Negroes in Jamestown. What forces conspired during these 4 decades to produce this incredible aberration in the great Anglo-American tradition of freedom? One thing is certain. Slavery was originally illegal in Virginia and the other English colonies. The first charter granted by James I to the Virginia Company in 1606 recited that all colonists shall have and enjoy all liberties, franchises, and immunities within any of our other dominions, to all intents and purposes, as if they had been abiding and born within the realm of England. The accompanying royale, or dares, directed the Council of the Virginia Company to follow the common law and the equity thereof. In 1609, a revised charter placed Virginia under the king, as of our manure of East Greenwich, and reiterated that colonists should enjoy all liberties of Englishmen as if they dwelt within the English realm. Most of the early Negro arrivals at Jamestown were former slaves pirated from New Spain, but there was no institutional basis for enslaving them in Virginia. So these early blacks entered a legal limbo in which there coalesced certain fateful forces, some internal, some external, some by happenstance, but some by very foul design. Yet these forces could not have resulted in slavery, but for the astonishing silence of 17th-century English lawyers, judges, and public officials on both sides of the Atlantic. During this conspiracy of silence, the colonists borrowed the institution of slavery from the vastly different culture and jurisprudence of Spain, adapting it to their own use.
The Spanish slave enjoyed the right to marriage and other family rights. Manumission was officially encouraged, and cruel punishment was illegal. Thus, the slave in New Spain remained a person in legal cognizance, in contrast to the English colonies, where he ultimately became a chattel with no rights in legal cognizance. The allure of the vast Spanish undertaking in the New World, with its attendant wealth and sea power. And African slaving was not lost on Elizabethan England. In 1562, John Hawkins, cousin of Sir Francis Drake, conceived the idea of selling slaves to Spanish colonists, despite the Spanish embargo on trade with non-Spaniards. Hawkins picked up a cargo of Negroes on the African coast and successfully peddled them in Spanish America, thereby becoming England's first slaver. For this feat, Captain Hawkins became an instant hero at home. Drake and the other sea dogs soon followed Hawkins into the exciting and profitable game of piracy on the Spanish Main, and English slaving became merely one aspect of English piracy. Negroes were considered simply one form of booty to be taken from the Spanish. Nevertheless, those first black arrivals at Jamestown were not enslaved immediately. Rather, they were assimilated into that singular institution known as indentured servitude for a term of years improvised by the Virginia Company from the child labor laws of Elizabethan England. The Elizabethan period was hard on the poor in England. With idlers everywhere, it was generally thought that the cure-all for poverty was work, forced labor if necessary. In this situation, in 1562, 45 years before the founding of Jamestown, Parliament borrowed from the guild system in London, where it was customary for youngsters to be apprenticed to a craftsman, to learn a trade under an indenture between the craftsman and the parents for a term of years. The Statute of Apprentices, 1562, declared in part, "Every householder retain the son of any freeman not occupying husbandry, nor being a laborer to be bound as an apprentice for 7 years at the least, so as the term does not expire, afore such apprentice shall be."
This statute surely acclimated Englishmen to the concept of bonded servitude, but it failed in its purposes. For the unemployment problem remained, and by the 1590s, famine gripped England. At length, Parliament passed the Poor Laws, intended to end the wanderings of the poor. The Act of 1601 declared, "The church wardens of every parish shall be overseers of the poor, and shall take order for setting to work the children of all whose parents shall not be thought able to keep their children, and for putting out of such children to be apprentices." Other sections authorize the putting to work of unemployed adults for terms of years. So by 1606, when James I chartered the Virginia Company to plant a colony on North America, the idea of forced labor in bonded servitude was an accepted national policy of Stuart England. From 1607 to 1618, the company in London labored to recruit venturesome souls to ship over, but the Jamestown foothold remained tenuous. In 1618, the impoverished company finally hit on a simple method to assure a growing volume of new colonists, privately indentured servants. Under this arrangement, a planter in Virginia would guarantee payment of passage of a new colonist. The recruit would sign an indenture in London, becoming, on our arrival at Jamestown, the indentured servant of the planter for a specified term, such as 7 years. The concept of indentured servants in Virginia and the other colonies was thus borrowed from the English Poor Laws. Soon the method was simplified further. An enterprising captain or ship owner would himself enlist recruits at London. On arrival at Jamestown, the recruits would be auctioned off to the highest bidder for a specified term by the captain at dockside. This rapidly became the common method of immigration. The rule soon arose in Jamestown and other colonial ports that any person without fare on arrival would simply be auctioned at dockside into indentured servitude. This system, which was practical and economical and legal by custom and usage, was probably considered fair by all concerned, given the precedents for indentured labor in England. Such was the situation when the first 20 Negroes arrived in 1619. As part of a prize taken by piracy from a Spanish ship in the Indies, they were simply indentured for their passage. The proceeds of the auction went to the owners of the pirate ship. Had future arrivals continued on a casual basis, they might all have been absorbed as indentured servants and ultimately have become free Americans, but for a more than casual interest in stolen Negroes. However, to the group of English traders who owned the pirate vessel, the arrival of the first Negroes at Jamestown was of more than casual significance, for they had already introduced stolen Spanish Negroes to Bermuda and planned to use Jamestown in a similar and larger pirate scheme. There always had been and always would be enormous profit in slaving. At the peak of the trade, one could realize a 30% gain on each Negro kidnapped in Africa and auctioned in Jamestown or some other colonial port, despite an average 50% loss by death or suicide among the black cargo. This group of ship owners was loosely identified with James I and was led by Robert Rich, later to be the Earl of Warwick, a prominent investor in the Virginia Company.